Hello friends. The game of my childhood, Tomodachi Life, has made its triumphant return and I am obsessed. Between the demo being dropped and the game releasing, I've created 74 Miis and you can bet I'm still making more. All that is to say, I am here, young scholar, as a self-proclaimed Mii-fessor to break down my process for creating Miis. First of all, we must understand the importance of makeup and why it's going to be pivotal to every other stage of the process. Tomodachi Life's face paint feature is a blessing from the Nintendo gods for the world of bizarre and improbable Miis. It allows people to add features the game's default customization options can't really provide and can be the difference between a Mii that looks like a character and a Mii that is that character. Something I think that people underestimate in character creation is the power of proportion, and with the grid system the face paint tool provides, we have a perfect starting point. Wait, sorry. A perfect starting point? What? You thought I was going to be using the Miimaker in this Miimaker tutorial? What do you think I am? Neurotypical? So, Tomodachi Life's makeup tool uses a canvas size of 256 pixels by 256 pixels, with each face shape aligning slightly differently from head to head. Don't have time to manually align each head shape to the canvas? Don't worry, I did it for you. Find a front-facing image of the character you want to create and place it over the grid. Bear in mind, any features clipping outside of the grid will either need to be cut off or have to be shrunk to fit on the canvas. Then, on a new layer, place a symmetry ruler in the center of the grid and either draw directly onto the canvas or trace over their features. A quick aside, if you're using Clip Studio like me, you can toggle this button on and off when switching between drawing features that are or aren't symmetrical. After you've drawn out all their features, hide the image. You might think that with this reference we're ready to hop back into the Miimaker, but not yet. You see, Miis have very cute and stylized proportions. Their features are simpler and cuter than most art styles, so if we want a Mii to look natural in-game, we need to alter their proportions to match that. I tend to make their eyes bigger, the nose and mouth smaller, and for their features to be further down the face. But what makes a character more appealing to you is ultimately up to preference. It is worth mentioning you can avoid this on purpose for a comedic effect if your goal is to create a Mii that doesn't really match the art style and proportions of the game. When you're satisfied with how your planning looks, it's time to finally open up the Miimaker. I usually start by making the Mii bald so you can see where the top of the head is, then place the Mii's features, positioning them to align as closely as possible to your reference. A good way of checking if they line up is to go to the face paint tab, turn on artist mode, go to gears, and then turn on the grid so you can compare with the version you made in your drawing software. The next stage is when I'd add hair if you're using any. Hair is an example of a landmark, which in art means an important feature on the face that can be used to determine where other features should be positioned. For example, Emi's hair cannot be repositioned, so to create a character like Fry from Splatoon, we can use her hair as a landmark for how far down the face her features should be placed. Landmarks also apply to the borders of the face paint canvas, the edges of the face, and beards. The reason I bring this up is because this is where you can deviate from your initial reference and start messing around with different features and proportions. For people who are newer to art, transferring your reference grid from your drawing software to your Switch might be unintuitive and tricky, so I'm going to break down exactly how I do that. For the people who are fine without that, you can skip ahead to this timestamp. So, we're basically going to be reverse engineering a dot-to-dot drawing. Find 2 points on the reference that are connected by a line, check which boxes those points are located in, mark them down in the Miimaker, and then connect the dots. Also worth mentioning, you can select either the smoothness or straight options depending on the kind of lines you're connecting the dots with, and then basically repeat this step until you've gotten all the lines down. Also, I mentioned earlier that the canvas is 256 by 256 pixels wide, but the amount of lines dividing the canvas can change depending on the grid you selected and how much you've zoomed in. For example, on the grid I made as a reference, the canvas is divided into 32 by 32 squares, which is the maximum amount of squares the face paint canvas can be divided into after you zoom in twice, otherwise the canvas will be divided into 16 by 16 squares. It's annoying and needlessly complicated, but it's important to mention in case you're confused. Now that we're out of the tutorial stage, I wanted to bring up a few important tips and concepts to consider when making Miis, one of which is hair clipping. Sometimes a character's hairstyle is a little too specific to accurately recreate with the tools provided, so you might want to add a few parts to an existing hairstyle and whoops, the hair is clipping through the face paint. In these cases, you'll want to go over to the hair tab and change the bangs to not clip through the face paint, then refer to your grid reference from earlier and redraw the bangs accurately. It is, however, worth considering that face paint can clip into certain hats depending on how high up it is. To make any drawn features look more natural, I'd recommend adding shadows to things, especially bangs, since they'll look out of place next to the part of the hair that is actually 3D. To make this easier, I'd recommend using 2 tools, Outline and Alpha Lock. Outline allows you to draw perfectly along an outline at your preferred brush thickness. However, it only allows you to add outline outlines to the edges of the entire drawing rather than the edges of, say, separate colors, which is where Alpha Lock is helpful as it lets you draw without adding any additional pixels to the canvas. Sometimes you cannot avoid clipping, like in cases where a character's most accurate hair option is part of a set that clips through the face paint, and in these cases you'll have to find a creative way to alter the face paint to match this hair. Although, sometimes you can actually use clipping to your advantage. Tomodachi Life's hair may not be flawlessly customizable, but the hair is able to go outside the face paint canvas and has highlights that shift with the lighting. If I wanted to create this character, I would run into some trouble because there are no hair options in-game that match how she is supposed to look. But there are bangs that are swept to the side and are nearly what we're looking for. Using this as our base, we can draw in the parts of the bang that are missing to complete her hair. It's also worth considering how color works in Tomodachi Life. You can pick whatever colors you want in the face paint canvas, but for hair and skin colors, your options are far more limited. So you'll have to use these colors to decide the ones you can freely change. If you have the freedom to pick the colors more precisely, you can color pick from your drawing software and attempt to recreate the color in the Miimaker. Just bear in mind that the color picker looks different from the one in your app, and you should use your intuition and observation to compare rather than trying to copy the position of the selected color. It is worth mentioning there is a difference between how the lighting affects colors in the Miimaker and on your island, and it affects face paint differently. This is most noticeable if you covered a feature of a Miis skin tone or drew part of their bangs. Fortunately, this is easily fixable. Check to see if the face paint appears lighter or darker than the desired color, and then go into the Miimaker and alter it. Most of this tutorial has been on face paint and getting characters to be as accurate to their canon appearance as possible, but it's worth bringing up when to rein in the face paint. I already mentioned earlier how face paint can clip into hats, but it can also look much worse when a Miyamoto is seen from the side. This is the most noticeable with the eyes. One solution to this is eye customization. Most people aren't aware of how insane the eye customization can get, but you can functionally place these features anywhere. There's a lot of eye tutorials online that I'd recommend that don't break when a Mii blinks, and can give you insight into how to use the parts of the eye at your disposal. With this insight, you can then use the planning stage to break down the needed parts to alter and recreate a character's eye accurately. Most of Tomodachi Life's tools lend themselves to creating characters with more vertical faces. You know, how a human's head is proportioned. But what about characters who have round or wide faces? There are a few solutions, and all of them require extensive use of the face paint tool. Either cover the character's entire face and functionally use their face as a mask, or in cases where a character either has a really long neck or has no neck but some hat or accessory on their head, smush their features as far up or down as you can. This method takes a lot of trial and error and won't look as natural as Mii's with more vertical faces, but it is doable, if not significantly trickier than the other methods. And that's all the advice I have for making Miis. I hope you found this advice helpful, and I'll see you later for another cup of tea.